Welcome back to this week's episode of The Follow-Up, where we recap this week's sermon so you can grow deeper in your relationship with Jesus. I'm here with Jack and Jeff. Welcome, guys.
Hey, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so today we are continuing in the book of Genesis. We're talking about how God's purposes prevail. We did things a little bit differently with this, where there was a ton of text that we were navigating. So Genesis 25 through 28, verse 9, there was just a lot that you guys went to uncover. But one of the things that I loved about both of your guys is because the text was a lot, it felt like I was just engaged in a really good story.
Oh, good.
Like I was listening to an audiobook of what's going to happen next. So I would love to know from you guys, give us a little synopsis of what kind of happened this week. And then I would love to hear from you guys about what really stood out to you from this week's sermon.
You want to handle the synopsis?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, go for it.
We were, we were coming into really the introduction of Jacob and Esau. I guess the beginning of our text had the official end of Abraham's story with the death of Abraham at 175, which we mentioned just kind of in passing, which was kind of cool to see, just the ending of like a man dying in peace at a good old age, being gathered to his people. And so it was a really cool picture. And then we had this kind of weird hop over. We did chapter 25, and then we jumped over 26 because we did the week prior Isaac's story, and really we're introduced to the babies, Jacob and Esau. And from the very get-go, I mean, with just the prophecy being spoken over them, you're introduced into this is not going to be necessarily the just complete happy family type dynamic. And so there's prophecy spoken over Rebekah, and specifically the older serving the younger. And then I know specifically in my sermon, a lot of the questions, at least initially, was just like, whoa, what kind of dynamic does even having a prophecy like this spoken over you create, into, I think, the dynamics between the brothers, the mom and dad choosing favorites. I mean, there was just all kinds of situations where, again, it was another one of those where it's like, this isn't necessarily a prescriptive text. Like, don't necessarily think your parenting or how you handle sibling rivalries. Like, you look at that and go, ooh, that's painful. And yet, at the same time, you go, well, but God did accomplish his purposes.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
And I think that was just the overriding, purpose that we had.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. And it's funny you mentioned you look at the prophecy, you understand it's in place, and yet Abraham's still going to try and bless Esau. Isaac's still going to try and bless Esau. Even though it says the older will serve the younger, bring me the food. And I also find it ironic that Isaac compromises his own questioning of, is this really Esau or is this Jacob? Boy, the food smells good. All right, I'll bless you. Even though you can tell, even in the banter and the questions he's asking, it's like you're saying, God knew the thread. God knew the storyline. And even though Isaac's choice would have been to bless Jacob, to bless Esau, he blesses Jacob even out of trickery, right?
Yeah.
So it is. It's a cool storyline that you remember. Should we teach our people to follow the biblical practice of planning to murder your brother, or deceiving your spouse, or tricking your brother out of their inheritance? Poor family communication, and then running away from all your problems at the end. I don't know. I don't know that that's a biblical mandate, but God uses it. And for me, to your point, I'm rabbit trailing a little bit. It's like this. The whole storyline is like, God's not done, no matter how screwed up your family may have been, or how you've done things that you're like, that wasn't scrupulous. But his will still be accomplished. So I don't know. It was kind of a good challenge to jump back on track with it too.
One of the things that stood out to me as I was listening to both of your guys' it was this concept of Esau was trading his birthright for the stew, like the food. He was trading the future for the now.
Yes.
And I think we see that a lot happening throughout culture and just like throughout life. And I think we all have stories of us even foolishly doing that. I would love for you guys to talk a little bit more about how we kind of see that play out today.
I love that. That for me wasn't even in my notes, but then like mid-message, I'm just thinking through it as I'm talking, and it's like, oh my goodness, he is willing to give up everything that secures his future for what he can get now. I mean, talk about king stomach, And I heard one time a person say, 30-year-old me would love to go back and kick 16-year-old me's butt because I ruined so many opportunities in my life because how I acted from 16 to 18. And I wonder how many times Esau was like, man, I was not very bright in that decision. But it is. It's that choice of, do I satisfy myself now because it looks good, smells good? You know, it'll feel so much better when he, like you pointed out in your message, he'd just come back from the hunt. Like, it's the same day. You're not going to die, bud. You know, and he has the goods in hand. He's just finished hunting, but he doesn't want to do the preparation.
Right.
So I don't want to prepare now to be satisfied now and be set up for later. I'd rather sell it all to just get what I want with no cost to me. To me, that's mind-blowing. And Esau in the moment probably didn't even think about that, but I bet he did later.
Yeah, that's so true. I think that, I don't know, I just thought through whether it was my own testimony or a lot of folks that I counsel, especially, like, I don't know, addiction was the thing that tied to it for me, where it was like, man, just being, I think, running towards what feels good in the moment, what is going to ultimately meet maybe that anxious part of me, that tired part of me, the rejection I got at work or from my spouse or whatever, and I'm just going to run to this, and it's going to make me feel good in the moment. Yeah, I'm going to feel terrible afterwards, and I'm not even thinking about the future.
Right.
And we talked a little bit about, like, with some of our, like, marriage mentors, like, how we can do that with time and money too, where you make, you know, temporary decisions now, not realizing that they're going to, like, affect and maybe inhibit the future decisions, where it's like, hey, yeah, we're not taking a vacation this year because we, you know, chose to eat out, or we chose to do, we made a number of financial decisions throughout the year. It's like, okay, we don't have the bandwidth we did. Or we, like, packed our schedule. So, yeah, no, sorry, honey, there's not time for us this week
margin.
Because we packed it with kids' activities, and now there isn't the space to really, I think, get into the things that we would say are most important. It's like, oh, these are the most important things to be a part of, and yet it's like, oh, but all these tiny decisions can inhibit our ability to do what we value most.
Yeah, and don't you think it's a picture of now? You know, it's now. It's what I can get now. I'm hungry right now. I look at too. I laugh at Esau's choosing a wife, because you look at Isaac's sent away, get from the people God had said. You know, this is where the thread continues. This is where the blessing is. The family is involved. That's a different story altogether. But it's a blessing to everybody. Like, Rebekah is a blessing. Then we're going to see the same thing with Jacob. Jacob, they're going to send away. They're going to get a wife. You know, it's very intentional how he gets a wife with Laban. And then you got Esau. He marries from the land where he is. There's no mention of wisdom involved in it. And it says that his wives bring bitterness to his parents. I just picture with, you know, Thanksgiving and Christmas is like, oh, Esau is bringing the family over, you know, and it's what's going to please me right now. I just kind of picked that up from Esau.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So flipping over to the other brother, we've got Jacob, who, with mom's permission, deceives dad about getting the blessing. I've taught Sunday school. I've taught this to elementary school kids. This was the first time I was like, oh, this is like real bad.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't just like, okay, it's like a son just like pulling something over on his dad. Like, I could tell a 9-year-old, like, this is not good. We can't like disobey our parents in this way. But dude's got his mom's backing.
Yes.
And he just seemed very submissive to like go along with it. And yes, like in the back of our minds, like as we read the Bible, we know that like the line is to come through Jacob. So like we know that moving forward. But still in that moment, I was like, this seems like a really messed up way for it to all really come about. And I want to hear from you guys of like, okay, all of us are parents of like, no, it's not this like ideal picture of what marriage is in this moment. I'm just so curious of like, what could have gone, like speculating of like what could have gone through their minds of, is it like Rebekah really just favors Jacob that much that she's willing to like deceive her husband to make sure he gets the blessing? Because Jeff, I think you had mentioned in the end, like Jacob runs away and then Esau has these wives and kind of like lives on the land that Isaac has. And it kind of seems like Esau has maybe a little bit more blessing, like in the moment, than Jacob moving away, even though like you'll have future blessings. So I'm just curious how your guys' take was on all of like the Jacob side of things. So we had the Esau, and now like going into like where Jacob really messed up.
I once again, I love the family dynamic in the storyline. Obviously, Jacob was the homebody, probably spent more time with mom. That could play into it, the relational aspect. Esau, I gotta believe this, and this is purely speculation, so I'll say that up front. When your wife/wives are a headache/bitterness to your household, and it's the women of the land where you're not supposed to marry in the first place, in my mind, I wonder if that plays into it as well. Because the blessing would then be in this lineage instead of the lineage of Jacob. And really, Laban's going to come into play again. We talked about him a few chapters ago. Rebekah had an ability to see forward. I mean, she left her family when her mom was just a couple chapters back, when her mom was like, hey, hang around a few more days with us. And she's like, I'm out. This is my future. This is where I'm going. So I don't know. In a little bit of speculative format and a relational aspect, I can kind of see where Rebekah knew this needed to happen not only for Jacob but also for our lineage. Like Esau's family's a mess. So,
well, and I think there's something I actually saw it, I think, when I was reading the text again. It's interesting that Esau, like when he makes the decision to marry the Ishmaelite later, it says he realized that it was displeasing to Isaac. Yeah. He doesn't mention Rebekah. It's like he knew. He maybe, I don't know if it was intentionally left out, but maybe he knew. Actually, I know my wives are driving mom crazy, but dad doesn't approve either. But
that's just mom.
Yeah, but I think that there's this theologian. He's with Jesus now. His name's Michael Heiser, and he imagines God as a king sitting on a divine council of angelic beings, which is a whole other other theologian conversation. But he imagines him as issuing edicts and decrees. And so, so if you imagine, like, the prophecy being given out, he issues this decree of, like, hey, this is going to happen. Like, the older is going to serve the younger. But then the way he describes it is that God gives agency and free, like, will for the agents to determine how that's going to come about. So whether those are angelic beings or those are people, that he allows for there to be a freedom as to how those decrees that are going to happen are going to come about. And so as I read it this time, I was just like, did they have to do it with deception? Like, did Rebekah really have to lie in order for that to happen? Did Jacob have to do it that way? I mean, he brings God into it. Oh, God gave me success. Yeah. You're like, oh, that's painful. And so there was a part of me that was asking, like, was that really necessary? Was there another way that could have come about? God's commands, his decrees are still going to happen, but did it need to happen where we have this horrific relational wreckage, at the end? And so I wonder, that's conjecture, but it's hard turn from the love story of Isaac and Rebekah to go like, what's going on in their marriage? That like, hey, there's deception with Jacob, and then she doubles down into deception with not saying that Esau wants to murder Jacob. She's just like, oh, the wives are bitter. That's why we need to send him away. Yeah. So there's something, there's an interesting marriage dynamic going down there.
There's a lot of family carnage in the Old Testament. I mean, you look at David's family. We can trace this back to, even Isaac and Ishmael. That wasn't pretty. Go back to Cain and Abel. That wasn't pretty. Yeah. Like, you can kind of trace some carnage along the way that it just doesn't always go real well with siblings. I mean, not that ever happens today, I'm sure. Like, everyone else's house is perfect.
Jeff, you're really laughing at that one. So one of the things that you guys had talked about is that God's purposes prevail in spite of our disordered desires and in spite of our lack of trust. And one of the things that you guys kind of really brought home with this was, it's like, where in our life are we having that lack of trust that maybe it is pulling us away from trusting in God's plan for us or God's purposes for us? So I would love to know from you guys, just kind of start wrapping things up, of what would be like that takeaway for somebody in light of this entire story in Genesis, that they can kind of take away with.
Yeah, that's a loaded question. You can kind of spill it over into different aspects of family, or like you were mentioning, finances can be a big one, business decisions, relational pieces. There's so many different aspects that you could go, well, if we hone in, then it could be ABC for each one. For me, this is for me. I know when my drug of choice can be control sometimes. I understand that. I know that. And when I start trying to grab on, it feels like a flight with a lot of turbulence. Like everything is bumps. Everything is problematic. The people I want to do certain things or family members, it's not happening. And the certain things with the jobs, they're not falling into place. The peace with the neighbor, I don't care. It just feels like everything is turbulence. And it's like when you're on a flight and the pilot says, we're going to go to a different altitude. We're going to get north of the turbulence. And that's when you get in the blue skies. And for me, it's keeping my eyes on heaven. That's kind of my go north, my go up, go above the turbulence. When I can do that in any aspect of life, and I can do it in my prayer life, and my prayers become more about, you are my Alpha and Omega, beginning and end. You are my source. You are my strength. You are my peace. You are my hope. You are my direction. You are my strength in when I'm feeling weak. You are my peace of mind. You are my great counselor. Okay, I don't need to fly in the middle of the clouds anymore. Get up above them and basically apply the cross, apply the wisdom of heaven into any situation. That, for me, is where I find peace in this. And I don't become angry or, Jacob, Rebekah, manipulative, or Esau, angry. I mean, any of these are naturally, I think all of us have a little Jacob and Esau in us, or Rebekah in us, or Isaac in us. So it's getting above that and getting out of this human side of it and seeing God's perspective in it.
Yeah. I think that, everybody's so different and unique. I think wherever obedience is painful, so whether that's obedience to God's explicit commands to do or to not do, right, or there are other host of things where I think James complicates it a lot of the good you ought to do and you don't do it.
Right.
And so I think that any time where there's that fleshy press of oof, am I going to trust him in these moments? And sometimes I don't know about y'all, but I feel like I'm better trusting with God when it's really big decisions. And so if it's big moves or big life-changing type situations, I'm a lot easier to do. And we were actually talking about this in one of our classes of it's a lot harder for me to trust God maybe in the little bitty decisions that happen throughout any given day. And so if I feel like God's calling me to do something and that decision is going to require me to die to self over and over and over again, that's a lot harder than, made this decision, heading this way, trust God, all right, we've moved forward. But the day in, the day out, I've got to die to self. I've got to be humble in this situation. I've got to choose what's ultimately good and God honoring. Those types of regular, I think, crucifying of the flesh.
Sure.
That's probably the hardest moments where I think, again, and that's where prayer is meant to be unceasing and that there is meant to be this relationship. And it's not that there's these sections of your life that are spiritual, but that every opportunity is this opportunity to invite God into it, that he would be strong in our weakness. And I think that, there's it's unique for each person. And I think that when you listen to messages and think about disordered desires, everybody's got something that they struggle to maybe turn from a good thing to an ultimate.
That's taking up your own cross, dying to yourself daily. Paul talks about that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for joining us for this week's episode of The Follow-Up. Make sure you're subscribed so you never miss out on an episode, and we'll see you guys next week.